Hello everyone, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So, settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. The dense forests of Flagstaff, Arizona shaped me long before I understood their influence. I was born there in the spring of 1985, when the ponderosa pines were shedding their yellow pollen like golden rain. My mother used to say I came into the world with pine sap in my veins instead of blood, and sometimes I wonder if she wasn't right. Our house sat on the edge of the Coconino National Forest, where the city's orderly streets dissolved into wilderness. From my bedroom window, I could see the San Francisco peaks rising against the horizon, their slopes dark with trees and, in winter, crowned with snow. My father worked as a geology professor at Northern Arizona University, specializing in the volcanic history of the region. He'd often take me on what he called field excursions, though really they were just elaborate hiking trips, where he'd point out different types of rocks and tell me stories about ancient volcanic eruptions that had shaped the landscape. These weren't ordinary father-son outings. They were adventures into deep time, where every boulder and cliff face held secrets waiting to be discovered. I spent my childhood exploring the network of trails that wound through the forest behind our house. While other kids were playing video games or watching TV, I was learning to read tracks in the mud, identifying bird calls and discovering hidden meadows that felt like my own private kingdoms. My mother worried about me wandering alone in the woods, but my father understood. He saw in me the same pull toward wild places that he felt himself. High school brought changes, as it always does. Suddenly there were expectations, college applications, career plans, the future looming like a storm on the horizon. Everyone assumed I'd follow my father into academia, but the thought of spending my life in lecture halls made me restless. I needed something different, something that would keep me connected to the wild places that had shaped me. That's when I met Orson Webb. He transferred to our school in junior year. A tall, gangly kid with thick glasses and an encyclopedic knowledge of North American wildlife. We were paired together for a biology project, studying the impact of forest fires on local ecosystems. What started as a school assignment quickly evolved into a genuine friendship built on our shared fascination with the natural world. Orson was different from my other friends. He approached nature with a scientist's precision, but a poet's soul. He could tell you the Latin name of every plant we encountered, but he also understood the profound silence of a forest at dusk, the way certain places could speak to something deep inside you. We spent countless weekends hiking together, pushing further into the backcountry, seeking out the places where maps grew vague and cell phones lost their signal. Our parents thought we were crazy when we announced our plan to become park rangers after graduation. They had bigger dreams for us: prestigious universities, professional careers, conventional success. But we had our own definition of success, one that couldn't be measured in dollars or degrees. We wanted to be guardians of the wild places, to protect the forests that had given us so much. We completed our training together at the National Park Service Academy, then took positions at different parks. Orson headed to Yellowstone, while I was assigned to the Catskill Mountains in New York. The separation was hard, but we kept in touch, sharing stories of our experiences in lengthy emails and occasional satellite phone calls. Neither of us could have predicted that our paths would cross again under circumstances that would change us forever. Looking back now, I realized that all those years in Flagstaff were preparing me for something. Every trail I hiked, every animal track I studied, every storm I weathered, they were all lessons, building blocks of survival. But nothing, not even a lifetime in the wilderness, could have truly prepared me for what I encountered in the Catskills that autumn day. Some things exist beyond preparation, beyond understanding, in the shadowy space where primal fears and ancient truths collide. Sometimes I dream about those ponderosa pines of my youth, their bark smelling of vanilla in the warm sun. In these dreams, I'm always walking deeper into the forest, following tracks I can't quite identify, while something watches from the shadows. I wake up reaching for my ranger's badge, grateful for the solid walls around me, yet knowing that somewhere out there, in the vast wilderness I've sworn to protect, there are things that defy explanation, things that remind us that we're not as far removed from our primitive past as we'd like to believe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened in the Catskills, you need to know how Orson and I got there, how our paths converged at exactly the wrong moment, or maybe exactly the right one. It's hard to tell anymore. When you've seen what we've seen, the line between fortune and fate becomes as blurry as tracks in the rain. The call from Orson came on a Wednesday evening in late September. I was reviewing trail maintenance reports in my cabin, a modest structure that served as both home and office, when my satellite phone buzzed. The connection was poor, his voice breaking through static, but his excitement was unmistakable. He'd taken a temporary assignment in the Catskills, filling in for a ranger on medical leave, and wanted to explore what he called the forgotten trails, abandoned logging paths that had been slowly reclaimed by the forest. "There's something out here, Byron," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I've been talking to the locals, the old-timers who've lived in these mountains their whole lives. They have stories that don't make it into the tourist guides." The line crackled, and I could hear the wind howling through trees on his end. "I need your expertise on this one, your tracking skills." I should have paid more attention to the undertone in his voice, attention that didn't match his usual methodical enthusiasm. But we'd been friends for so long, had shared so many adventures that I didn't hesitate. I arranged for coverage of my regular duties and began preparing for what we'd planned as a 4-day expedition into one of the most remote sectors of the park. The preparation became an obsession over the next week. I spent hours poring over topographical maps, studying the intricate maze of abandoned trails and old-growth forest. The area Orson wanted to explore was marked with warnings: unstable terrain, limited radio contact, emergency response difficult. Standard cautions for experienced rangers, but something about seeing them all clustered in one region made my skin prickle. My equipment list grew longer with each passing day. Beyond the usual gear, first aid kit, emergency shelter, water purification system, I found myself adding items I rarely carried: extra flares, a heavy-duty flashlight with spare batteries, a more robust medical kit including suture materials. It was as if some deep instinct was trying to prepare me for something my conscious mind couldn't yet grasp. The locals' reaction when I mentioned our planned route didn't help ease my growing unease. At the general store where I bought supplies, old Jim Thatcher, who'd run the place for 40 years, went pale when I pointed out our destination on the map. "That's Cooper's Hollow," he said, his weathered hands trembling slightly as he bagged my purchases. "Ain't nobody been up there in years, not since the Mackenzie boy disappeared back in '98. I pressed him for details, but he just shook his head and muttered something about things better left alone. It wasn't the first time I'd encountered local superstitions in my work. Every wilderness area had its legends, but something about his reaction felt different. This wasn't the usual campfire story meant to scare tourists. This was raw fear, deeply embedded in the community's collective memory. The night before Orson was due to arrive, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my father. The connection was clear enough that I could hear the familiar crackle of his fireplace in Flagstaff. We talked about nothing in particular at first. His latest research, the changing weather patterns in Arizona, my mother's garden. Then, almost despite myself, I found myself telling him about the expedition. "The forests out there are different from what you know," he said after a long pause. "The Catskills are ancient in a way the Western Mountains aren't. They've had more time to develop peculiarities. He cleared his throat. Just remember what I taught you about reading the land. Sometimes the ground itself tries to tell us things if we're willing to listen. That night I dreamed of the ponderosa pines of my childhood, but they were wrong somehow, twisted and dark. In the dream, I was following tracks in the snow, not animal tracks, not human tracks, but something in between. They led deeper and deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so close together they blocked out the sky. I woke in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, with the distinct feeling that I wasn't alone in my cabin. The morning Orson arrived. The mountains were shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to swallow sound itself. He stepped out of his truck looking thinner than I remembered, his usual neat appearance replaced by something more haggard. Dark circles shadowed his eyes behind his glasses, and his hands shook slightly as we embraced. "You look like hell," I said, trying to keep my tone light. He attempted a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Haven't been sleeping well. Too many reports to file." But he wouldn't meet my gaze, and I noticed he kept glancing over his shoulder at the wall of fog that concealed the forest. We spent that morning going over our gear and finalizing our route. Orson had brought additional equipment, motion-sensitive cameras, infrared sensors, and a set of large animal traps that seemed excessive even for bear country. When I questioned him about it, he brushed it off as standard research protocol. But there was nothing standard about the way his hands shook as he checked each piece of equipment. Looking back now, I realize we were both keeping secrets that morning. Orson wasn't telling me everything he knew about what was happening in Cooper's Hollow, and I wasn't telling him about my growing sense of dread. We'd been friends too long, trusted each other too much, to admit that something felt fundamentally wrong about what we were about to do. As we shouldered our packs and headed into the fog-shrouded forest, I couldn't shake the memory of old Jim Thatcher's trembling hands, or the echo of my father's words about the land trying to tell us things. The fog seemed to thicken with each step, until the trees just 20 feet ahead were nothing but dark shadows, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Neither of us could have known that we were walking into something that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the natural world, about friendship, and about our own capacity for survival. The forests of my childhood had prepared me for many things, but nothing could have prepared me for what waited for us in Cooper's Hollow. The first few hours of our hike followed established trails, though established might be too generous a word. These were old logging roads, barely visible beneath decades of forest growth. The fog hung thick around us, turning familiar shapes into looming shadows. Our conversation was sparse, limited to technical observations about the terrain and weather conditions. Both of us seemed to sense that unnecessary noise would be unwelcome here. By early afternoon, we reached the point where the mapped trails ended. Ahead lay Cooper's Hollow, a deep depression in the landscape that seemed to gather shadows like a bowl collects water. The trees here were different, older, more gnarled, their bark black with age and moisture. The ground beneath our boots felt wrong somehow, too soft in some places, unnaturally hard in others. "The Mackenzie boy disappeared somewhere around here," Orson said suddenly, breaking our long silence. "Local police said he just wandered off, got lost in the woods. But they never found a body, never found any trace of him." He adjusted his glasses, a nervous habit I remembered from our school days. "That's not the only disappearance, Byron. I've been doing research. Every few decades, people go missing in these woods. The official reports blame it on exposure, on accidents, on wild animals. But the patterns..." He trailed off as we heard a sound in the distance, something between a cry and a howl, but not quite either. We both froze, listening intently, but it didn't repeat. The fog seemed to thicken around us, as if responding to our unease. We made camp that night in a small clearing, though neither of us wanted to stay there. The ground was littered with fallen leaves that seemed to whisper with every breath of wind. Orson set up his monitoring equipment. Motion sensors in a perimeter around our camp, infrared cameras pointing into the darkness. I noticed his hands were steady now, as if having a purpose had calmed his nerves. It was during my first watch that I found the bone. I'd walked the perimeter of our camp, checking Orson's sensors, when my flashlight beam caught something white protruding from the earth. At first I thought it was just another root. The forest floor was full of them, but as I brushed away the leaves and soil, I realized what I was looking at. A femur, far too large to belong to any animal native to these mountains. The bone was old, yellowed with age, but the marks on it were unmistakable, deep grooves that could only have been made by teeth. But these weren't the teeth marks of any predator I knew. They were too precise, too methodical, as if whatever had made them had been savoring its meal. I woke Orson to show him my discovery. He examined the bone with an intensity that bordered on reverence, his scientific training evident in the way he handled and documented it. But there was something else in his expression, not surprise, but confirmation, as if this was exactly what he'd expected to find. "There are more," he said quietly, pulling out his notebook. "I found similar specimens in other parts of the hollow, always with the same marking pattern, always from large prey." He opened the notebook, showing me detailed sketches of bones, measurements, analysis. "Whatever's doing this, Byron, it's not just killing for food. It's studying its prey." That's when we heard it again. That not quite howl, closer now. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, bouncing off the trees multiplied by the fog. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness, creating more shadows than they dispelled. It came for us just before dawn. The motion sensors went off in a cascade of alerts, and we heard the sound of branches breaking, something large moving through the forest with deliberate speed. We backed up against each other, weapons ready, scanning the darkness. The creature that emerged from the fog defied explanation. It moved like a wolf, but was larger than any bear I'd ever seen. Its fur was a mottled gray that seemed to shift and change in the dim light, making it hard to focus on. But it was the eyes that stopped my breath. Intelligence burned in them, cold and calculating, studying us as we studied it. The attack was swift and coordinated. It wasn't alone. There were others moving in the fog, circling our position. We fired our weapons, but the creatures seemed to anticipate our moves, dodging with unnatural speed. They were herding us, I realized with horror, driving us deeper into the hollow. The battle that followed exists in my memory as a series of fragmented images. Orson's flashlight beam catching a creature mid-leap, jaws open to reveal rows of serrated teeth. The sound of gunfire echoing through the trees. The horrible moment when one of them got hold of my leg, teeth sinking through my boot before I managed to drive my knife into its eye. We fought our way to a rocky outcropping, using the high ground to our advantage. Orson's traps proved useful. We heard them snap shut in the darkness, followed by inhuman screams of pain. But for every creature we stopped, another seemed to take its place. The turning point came when Orson threw his last flare into a cluster of dead trees. The sudden light revealed dozens of eyes reflecting in the darkness. We were surrounded by more of them than we'd imagined. But the fire spread quickly through the dry undergrowth, creating a barrier between us and them. We ran. There's no heroic way to describe it. We ran until our lungs burned, following the compass bearing that we hoped would lead us back to civilization. Behind us we could hear them pursuing, their howls mixing with the roar of the spreading fire. Dawn was breaking when we finally reached the ranger station. We were bloody, exhausted, and half-mad with fear. The fire had grown into a serious blaze, and emergency crews were already mobilizing to fight it. In the chaos of the evacuation and firefighting effort, our story got lost. Maybe that was for the best. The official report listed it as a bear attack. 3 days later, after the fire was contained, they found the remains of several large animals in Cooper's Hollow, burned beyond recognition. The authorities assumed they were bears, and we didn't correct them. Who would have believed us? Orson left the Park Service shortly after. Last I heard, he was teaching at a small college in Vermont, as far from the deep woods as he could get. We still talk occasionally, but never about what happened that night. Some experiences create a bond that doesn't need words. Years have passed, but I still serve as a ranger in the Catskills. Someone needs to be here, to watch the boundaries between civilization and wilderness, to remember what lurks in the deep places of the world. The creatures haven't returned, at least not that I know of. But sometimes, on foggy nights when the moon is hidden, I hear sounds in the forest that shouldn't exist. I've never gone back to Cooper's Hollow, though I could probably find my way there blindfolded. The area remains officially closed, marked as a wildlife preserve. The locals still avoid it, their old fears reinforced by news stories about the strange fire and the things some of them saw in the smoke. My leg healed, but it aches when storms approach, and the scars form a pattern that I try not to look at too closely. I keep Orson's notebook locked in my desk drawer, along with photographs and samples we collected that night. Sometimes I'm tempted to send them to a university, to let scientists study them and tell me what we really saw. But then, I remember my father's words about the land trying to tell us things, and I think maybe some secrets are meant to stay buried in the deep woods, in places like Cooper's Hollow, where the trees grow too close together and the shadows move in ways they shouldn't. I still do my job, protect the park and its visitors, guide lost hikers back to safety. But I pay more attention now to the old stories, the local legends, the places on the map where the trails end and the real wilderness begins. Because I know now that there are things in this world that can't be explained by science or reason. Things that live in the spaces between what we know and what we fear. And sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if they're still out there, watching and waiting, studying us as we once studied them. The thought should terrify me, but instead it brings a strange kind of peace. It reminds me that the world is bigger and stranger than we imagine, that there are still mysteries in the dark places of the earth. And maybe that's how it should be. My name is Ahanu Blackfeather, and I've been a park ranger in Denali National Park for 7 years now. Before Alaska claimed me, I'd worked smaller preserves in Montana and Washington, but nothing compares to the vast wilderness that stretches beyond my cabin window. The locals say Denali means the high one, in the Koyukon language. Standing at the edge of my property, watching that mountain command the landscape, I understand why the native peoples regarded it with such reverence. I came to Alaska running from debt and heartbreak. My father's medical bills had bankrupted what little savings I'd managed to scrape together working seasonal ranger positions in the lower 48. After he passed, I found myself with nothing but a biology degree, a backpack full of camping gear and creditors calling daily. When the Denali position opened full-time, with housing provided, I applied without a second thought. The Park Service cabin they assigned me sits on the edge of a spruce forest, about 40 miles from the nearest town. It's a simple one-bedroom structure with a wood stove, small kitchen, and a front porch that faces the mountains. In summer, I wake to meadows of fireweed and the distant calls of sandhill cranes. In winter, the isolation becomes complete. Snow drifting against the windows, aurora borealis painting the sky in ghostly ribbons of green and purple. I loved the solitude at first. After growing up on the Blackfeet Reservation in Montana, where privacy was scarce, having space to breathe felt like luxury. My grandfather had taught me to track, to read the wilderness like a book. Those skills serve me well here, where my job often involves finding lost hikers or monitoring wildlife movements across the vast tundra. The land will speak to you, my grandfather used to say, but only if you know how to listen. I've always been a good listener. 3 weeks ago, something in these woods started speaking, and I wish to God I couldn't hear it. It began with footprints. I was checking trail conditions after an early October snowfall when I spotted them crossing the path. human-shaped but wrong somehow. The stride was too long, toes splayed wider than any normal foot. I followed them for half a mile before they simply stopped, as if whatever made them had suddenly taken flight. That night, I heard knocking on my cabin door. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the darkness at 2:17 a.m. When I checked, no one was there, but something had scattered the firewood I keep stacked on the porch. The temperature read 15 degrees, too cold for most animals to be active. The next morning, I radioed my supervisor, Maya. "Probably just a moose rubbing against your cabin," she said, her voice crackling through the static. "Thompson over in Sector 4 had a black bear trying to den under his porch last winter." I didn't tell her about the footprints or how the knocking came again the next night. Same time, same 3 raps. I didn't tell her that when I looked out the window. I saw a figure standing at the tree line, too tall, too thin to be human, but standing upright nonetheless. I come from people who believe in skinwalkers, humans who through dark medicine can transform into animals, or something between human and beast. My grandfather spoke of them in whispers, never at night, never by name. To speak of evil is to invite it, he would say. As a college-educated park ranger with scientific training, I've always dismissed such stories as cultural metaphors, warnings wrapped in supernatural clothing. But science has no explanation for what happened 3 days later, when I found a perfectly preserved coyote skin stretched across my front door, pinned with bone needles, still wet with blood despite the freezing temperatures. The radio was dead when I tried to call it in. My satellite phone too. Even my truck wouldn't start. Winter had arrived early in Denali, and I was alone with something that shouldn't exist. Something that knocked 3 times in the darkness and left impossible footprints in the snow. I know now why my grandfather feared the skinwalkers, and I know I should have listened more carefully when he taught me how to protect myself from them. Growing up on the reservation, I remember elders warning us never to name the skinwalkers directly. Evil recognizes its name, my grandmother would say while fastening a small leather pouch of protective herbs around my neck. I lost that pouch years ago, dismissing it as superstition. Now I would give anything to have it back. The morning after finding the coyote skin, I hiked the 8 miles to the nearest ranger station. The snow made the journey treacherous, but fear makes a powerful motivator. I arrived exhausted to find the station empty, unusual for this time of year. A note on the bulletin board indicated that all personnel had been called to the south entrance for a search and rescue operation. I tried the landline. Dead. With night approaching and no desire to hike back to my cabin in darkness, I decided to wait for someone to return. I built a fire in the wood stove and settled in with the station's logbook, hoping to distract myself. What I found instead sent ice through my veins. Multiple entries over the past month detailed strange occurrences, unexplained tracks, equipment failures, livestock mutilations in nearby communities. One entry from Ranger Peterson described finding a deer carcass twisted into impossible shapes, as if someone had tried to fold it into origami. Another from Ranger Williams noted his dogs refusing to enter certain areas of the forest, standing at attention and growling at nothing. The final entry, dated just 3 days prior, simply read, "It's watching us." Sleep was impossible after that. I sat by the window, rifle across my lap, watching the darkness beyond the glass. Around midnight, I saw movement at the edge of the trees, a figure walking upright but wrong somehow, its proportions distorted. It paused, and though I couldn't make out features in the darkness, I felt it looking directly at me. Then it mimicked my posture, head tilted slightly, shoulders squared. It was studying me. I blinked and it was gone. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had been a product of exhaustion and fear, until I saw the tracks circling the entire station, passing by each window in turn. The radio crackled to life suddenly, making me jump. Ahanu? Come in, Ahanu. Maya's voice tense with concern. I'm here, but I'm at Toklat Station. Something's wrong at my cabin. Static, then. We know. Thompson found something. We've been trying to reach you. Stay where you are. We're sending a team. What did Thompson find? My mouth went dry. A long pause. We're not sure. Animal remains, a lot of them, arranged around your cabin, like some kind of boundary. I thought of the footprints that stopped suddenly, as if whatever made them had taken flight. I thought of the impossible figure at the tree line. Maya, has anyone gone missing recently? Any tourists or locals? More static, then. How did you know? We've had 3 disappearances in the last month. Hikers. We found their gear, but no bodies. I closed my eyes, remembering stories my grandfather told. Skinwalkers need to feed. They hunt the isolated, the vulnerable, but they also hunt those who recognize them for what they are. Maya, I need you to look into something. Ask the local tribal elders about protective measures. Tell them. I hesitated, reluctant to name what I feared. Tell them it's about the Yi Naldlushi. The what? Just tell them. They'll understand. I spent that day securing the station, salting thresholds, hanging mirrors in windows. Skinwalkers, according to legend, cannot stand to see their reflected form. I found sage in the emergency medical kit and burned it in every room. The team Maya promised never arrived. The radio went silent by dusk. As darkness fell, I heard footsteps on the station's metal roof, pacing, methodical. Then a voice called down through the chimney. Ahanu. My name, but in my own voice. Perfect mimicry. 3 knocks at the door followed. I pressed myself against the far wall, clutching my rifle, knowing bullets would be useless against what waited outside. I know your name now, the voice called. Still using my voice, but somehow wrong, like an instrument slightly out of tune. And you know mine. That means we belong to each other. The door handle began to turn slowly. I hadn't locked it. The door swung open to reveal nothing. Just swirling snow and darkness. My breath frosted in front of me as cold air invaded the station. I raised my rifle, tracking across the empty doorway. Show yourself, I demanded, my voice steadier than I felt. Laughter answered. My own laughter played back like a distorted recording. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. You invited me, the voice said. Speaking my name, thinking of me, fearing me, all invitations. Something moved in my peripheral vision. A shadow detaching from the wall, sliding across the floor like liquid darkness. I fired instinctively, the bullet embedded in the wall, useless. Your grandfather knew better. The voice had changed, becoming my grandfather's raspy tone. He respected the old ways. Ice formed in my stomach. Don't you dare use his voice, I hissed. Why not? I've used his skin. The shadow coalesced, rising up like smoke forming into substance. It took shape slowly. A tall, emaciated figure with limbs too long, joints bent at unnatural angles. Its face remained mercifully obscured in darkness, but I could make out the gleam of eyes reflecting the firelight. I backed away, remembering fragments of protective lore. Never look directly at a skinwalker. Never show fear. Never let it cross your threshold uninvited. Too late for the last one. What do you want? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. It tilted its head bird-like. Company. The word emerged as a rasping whisper. These woods are lonely in winter. There are other rangers, other hikers. Not like you. It took a step forward, movement jerky and disjointed. Not with the old blood, not with the knowing. I understood then. My Blackfeet heritage, the teachings I'd half listened to, the traditions I'd set aside for science and rationality. This thing had been drawn to that connection, the part of me that could sense it, name it. The others didn't last long. It continued conversationally, gesturing vaguely toward the forest. No understanding of what was happening. Just fear and confusion. But you, it made a sound like satisfaction. You're different. My back hit the wall. Nowhere left to retreat. The missing hikers, I said. The rangers who never came. What did you do to them? It spread its hands, too many fingers, too long. I wore them for a while. Their voices, their memories, their faces. A terrible pause. Would you like to see? Before I could respond, its features began to shift, melting and reforming like wax under heat. I recognized the face taking shape. Thompson, the ranger who'd discovered the animal remains around my cabin. His normally kind eyes now vacant, his expression frozen in terror. He screamed your name at the end, the creature said with Thompson's mouth. Begged me to spare you. The face melted again, reforming into a young woman I didn't recognize. This one was hiking alone. Bad decision. I closed my eyes, fighting nausea. Stop it. Open your eyes, Ahanu, it whispered, now using Maya's voice. See what's coming for you. Instead, I lunged for the wood stove, grabbing a handful of burning sage I'd left there. I threw it at the creature, simultaneously reciting a protection prayer my grandfather had taught me. Words I hadn't spoken since childhood, but which came back with surprising clarity. The Skinwalker hissed, recoiling as the burning herbs struck it. Its form seemed to waver, like heat distortion over asphalt. I seized my chance, bolting past it through the open door into the snowy night. Running blindly, breath burning in my lungs, I headed for the forest. The creature's enraged howl followed me, a sound no human or animal throat should produce. I had no plan beyond escape, no destination in mind as I plunged through knee-deep snow. The temperature must have been well below zero, and I was dressed only in my indoor clothes. Hypothermia would claim me within hours if the Skinwalker didn't catch me first. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting everything in blue-gray shadow. I paused behind a massive spruce, trying to quiet my breathing, listening for pursuit. Nothing but silence, that perfect, absolute silence that comes only in deep winter when snow absorbs all sound. Then, a voice directly behind me. Your grandfather tried running too. I whirled around, slipping in the snow, falling backward. The Skinwalker loomed above me, a silhouette against the star-filled sky. In the moonlight, I could see its face clearly for the first time, or rather faces. Features shifted constantly across its surface. Thompson, Maya, the young hiker. Others I didn't recognize, and most horrifyingly, my grandfather's weathered countenance sliding in and out of view. He ran for 3 days, it said. My grandfather's voice emerging from that monstrous, shifting face. Through mountains very like these. I was younger then, hungrier, less patient. My hands scrabbled in the snow, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. They closed around a fallen branch. Useless against this creature, but I gripped it anyway. You never knew how he died, did you? The Skinwalker continued, crouching down to my level. Its movement was wrong, too fluid, as though its joints weren't solid. Your family told you it was his heart. A comfortable lie. You're lying, I spat, though doubt crept in. My grandfather's death had always been shrouded in vague explanations. He'd been found in the mountains, alone, no signs of struggle. Everyone assumed his heart had given out on one of his solitary hikes. The creature's face settled momentarily into a perfect replica of my grandfather's. He fought well, it said, almost respectfully. Had the old knowledge, but in the end, it gestured to itself. I took what I wanted. Rage boiled up through my fear. I swung the branch, connecting with the creature's head. It didn't flinch, didn't even blink. The branch passed through its face as though through smoke, though its form appeared solid. It laughed, a sound like cracking ice. Your grandfather's spirit gives me strength even now. Imagine what yours will add. What do you want from me? I demanded, scrambling backward through the snow. I told you. Company. Its head tilted, curious. These winters are long. I need someone who understands, who knows the old ways, someone to hunt with. It extended a hand, normal-looking one moment, grotesquely elongated the next. Join me, Ahanu, willingly. It's less painful that way. A memory surfaced. My grandfather sitting by our wood stove speaking in hushed tones about the dark spirits. They offer gifts, power, companionship, he'd said. Never accept. Their gifts are poison. Their friendship is slavery. Never, I whispered. The creature's face twisted, all pretense of humanity vanishing, its jaw extended impossibly, teeth lengthening into needles. Then I take unwillingly. It lunged for me, but I was already moving, rolling to the side, abandoning any attempt at fighting. I ran again, zigzagging between trees, no longer caring about noise or tracks. Pure survival instinct drove me now. Behind me, I heard it following. Not running, but moving in great bounding leaps, crashing through the underbrush. It was playing with me, I realized. It could have caught me already if it wanted to. Through the trees ahead, I spotted a frozen creek bed. Without thinking, I slid down the bank onto the ice. My boots found no traction. I sprawled forward, sliding several yards before catching myself. The Skinwalker appeared at the top of the bank, its form now more animal than human. Elongated limbs, a suggestion of a snout, but still unnaturally upright. Nowhere left to run, it growled, voice guttural. I glanced around desperately and noticed what I'd slid onto, not a creek, but a wider river, frozen over, but with the unmistakable current flowing beneath the ice. The Toklat River. And if I remembered my maps correctly. I'm not running anymore, I called, slowly standing on the slippery surface. You want me? Come get me? The Skinwalker paused, seemingly surprised by my sudden defiance. It studied me suspiciously, then descended the bank with inhuman grace. I backed away slowly, leading it further onto the ice. 20 feet, 30 feet. The ice creaked beneath our combined weight. What game are you playing, Ahanu? It asked, suddenly wary. I smiled grimly. My grandfather taught me more than you know. The legends say that skinwalkers cannot cross running water. I didn't know if that was true, but I did know that the Toklat River never completely freezes, its current too strong, fed by underground hot springs. The ice was thinnest at the center. The Skinwalker's eyes widened in realization, just as the ice beneath us gave a warning groan. It lunged for me, but I was already throwing myself backward, away from the weakening spot. The ice shattered with a sound like gunfire. The creature dropped through, its scream of rage turning to gurgling as the current caught it. I scrambled away from the growing hole, watching as it thrashed in the frigid water. To my horror, it didn't sink. Instead, it began pulling itself back toward the ice edge, claws scrabbling for purchase. Our eyes met across the dark water. This changes nothing, it hissed, its form already beginning to transform into something more suited to water. I will find you. I turned and ran before I could see what new shape it took, stumbling along the riverbank toward what I hoped was the direction of the park headquarters. The temperature was dropping rapidly with nightfall, and my soaked clothes were already stiffening with ice. I had bought myself time, nothing more. And as the adrenaline faded, replaced by bone-deep cold, I wondered if the Skinwalker would even need to find me. The Alaskan wilderness might finish its work. Through the trees ahead, impossibly, I saw lights. Human lights. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. The lights belonged to a small hunting cabin, not park property, but private land bordering the preserve. Smoke curled from its chimney, promising warmth and, more importantly, human presence. I stumbled toward it, my legs numb, consciousness beginning to fade at the edges. I collapsed against the door, pounding weakly. "Help!" I croaked, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. The door swung open and I fell forward into warmth and light. Strong hands caught me. "Jesus Christ!" a gruff voice exclaimed. "You're half frozen!" I tried to speak, to warn about what might be following me, but exhaustion claimed me. I remember being dragged inside, blankets piled on me, a fire blazing nearby, then darkness. I woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. For a blissful moment, I thought I was back in my own cabin, that everything had been a nightmare. Then the pain hit. my extremities burning as circulation returned, my muscles screaming from exertion and cold exposure. "Easy there," said the same gruff voice. "You've got some frostbite, but nothing looks black yet. Should keep all your fingers and toes." I forced my eyes open. A man in his 60s sat nearby, bearded and weathered, dressed in typical Alaskan layers, flannel, wool, canvas. He held out a steaming mug. "Nathan Wells," he introduced himself. "You're on my hunting property." "A Hanu Blackfeather," I managed, taking the mug with trembling hands. "Park ranger," he nodded. "Figured as much from the uniform. What were you doing out in this weather without proper gear? Suicide mission?" "How to explain?" I sipped the coffee, gathering my thoughts. "Something's in the park," I said finally. "Something dangerous. It's killed people." Wells raised an eyebrow. "Bear wolf pack." I shook my head. "Worse." "Well, whatever it is, it can wait till morning. Storm's picking up out there." I hadn't noticed, but now I heard it. Wind howling around the cabin's eaves, snow pattering against the windows. A blizzard was rolling in, which might be the only reason the Skinwalker hadn't already found me. "How far are we from park headquarters?" I asked. 30 miles by road, but my truck won't make it in this weather." 30 miles. Might as well be 1,000. I closed my eyes, fighting despair. "You should rest," Wells said, standing. "We can radio for help when the storm breaks." "Radio?" Hope surged. "You have a working radio?" He nodded toward an old ham radio setup in the corner. "Solar-powered. Signal might not get through the storm, but we can try." I struggled to my feet, ignoring the pain. "We need to try now, before it finds us." Wells frowned. "Before what finds us?" I met his eyes. "Do you know the old stories? The native legends about skinwalkers?" Something flickered across his face, recognition then quickly masked. "My wife was Athabascan," he said carefully. "She had beliefs." "It's real," I said simply. "It's in these woods. It's hunting me." Wells was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded once decisively. "Let's try that radio." The equipment was older than what we used at the park, but well maintained. Wells adjusted dials, trying different frequencies. Static answered each attempt. "Storm's interfering," he muttered. "Might have to wait." A sound outside made us both freeze, something heavy moving on the cabin roof. The same pacing footsteps I'd heard at the ranger station. Wells's eyes widened. He reached slowly for a rifle mounted on the wall. "Bullets won't stop it," I whispered. "Maybe not," he agreed, checking the chamber regardless. "But my wife taught me a few things too." He moved to a trunk in the corner, extracting a small leather pouch, similar to the one my grandmother had made for me as a child. He pressed it into my hand. "Keep this on you." The radio suddenly crackled to life. "Repeat, any stations, emergency broadcast. Evacuation order for all civilians within Denali National Park boundaries. Reports of multiple ranger casualties. Unknown predator." Wells and I locked eyes. The evacuation explained why no help had come when Maya called it in. They were dealing with a larger crisis. The Skinwalker had been busy. The footsteps above stopped. Something scratched at the chimney. "Ahanu," my own voice called down. "I found you." Wells moved with surprising speed for his age, grabbing a container of salt and laying a line across the threshold and windowsills. "We need to hold out till morning," he whispered. "It's strongest at night." 3 knocks at the door, the familiar pattern that had haunted me for weeks. "Ahanu," the voice called again, now perfectly mimicking Wells. "Let me in. I'm cold out here." Wells remained impressively calm. "My wife said they need permission to enter a home. Don't acknowledge it. Don't respond." The knocking intensified, becoming a pounding that shook the entire door. The temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly. I could see my breath clouding in front of me. "This is my territory," the voice roared, abandoning mimicry for something ancient and terrible. "You cannot hide from me in my own land." The windows rattled. The fire dimmed as though starved for oxygen. Outside, the storm howled with unnatural fury, snow and ice pelting the cabin like bullets. Wells and I retreated to the center of the room, backs together, watching every possible entrance. The protective pouch felt warm against my skin, the only warmth in the increasingly frigid cabin. "Dawn is 3 hours away," Wells murmured. "We just need to last 3 hours." A terrible cracking sound came from above, wood splintering as something tore at the roof. Snow began to drift down through widening gaps in the ceiling. The Skinwalker was trying to break in from above. Wells handed me a knife, the blade strangely dark, not steel but some kind of stone. "Obsidian," he explained. "My wife said it works against them." The roof gave another tremendous crack. A long, distorted limb snaked through the opening, feeling blindly for us, fingers too numerous, joints bending backward. This was it. The final confrontation, dawn still hours away, and I realized we weren't going to make it. The arm withdrew suddenly as Wells thrust a burning log toward it. The creature hissed, the sound echoing through the damaged roof. "Fire," I breathed. "It doesn't like fire." Wells nodded grimly. "Most things that hunt in darkness don't." We worked quickly, igniting anything that would burn. Papers, spare clothing, even Wells's cherished collection of paperback westerns. The cabin filled with smoke, but the heat pushed back against the unnatural cold the Skinwalker had brought. "We can't burn the place down around us," Wells coughed, eyes watering. "We won't have to," I replied, an idea forming. "We just need to get to your truck." "Told you, roads are impassable in this storm." "We don't need roads." I pointed at an old topographical map pinned to his wall. "Park headquarters is northeast. The valley floor gives us a straight shot. No major elevation changes. In this much snow, we could make better time with a snowmobile or even cross-country skis." Wells's eyes widened with understanding. "I've got a snowmobile in the shed, but we'd be exposed out there." "We're not safe in here either," I countered, as another section of roof splintered. "At least moving gives us a chance." He considered for only a moment before nodding. "I'll get the engine warming. You gather supplies." He handed me a backpack. "Anything that might help against that thing." While Wells slipped out the back door toward the shed, I stuffed the pack with what little I could find. The obsidian knife, salt, matches, the protective pouch, a flashlight. I grabbed his rifle too, despite knowing its limited usefulness. Above, the Skinwalker was systematically destroying the roof, ripping away sections with methodical patience. It knew we couldn't escape, or so it thought. The snowmobile's engine roared to life outside. I took a burning piece of wood as a makeshift torch and made for the door, only to freeze as something landed heavily in front of the cabin. The Skinwalker had abandoned the roof, anticipating my escape. 3 rapid knocks at the door. "I smell your fear, Ahanu," it crooned. "Sweet like summer berries." I backed away, searching frantically for another exit. The windows were too small, the chimney too narrow. The door handle turned slowly. I raised the burning wood, prepared to fight even knowing it was hopeless. The door flew open, not inward as expected, but outward, torn from its hinges as Wells rammed it with the snowmobile. The Skinwalker, caught by surprise, was knocked backward into the snow. "Now!" Wells shouted over the engine's roar. I leapt onto the back of the snowmobile, clinging to Wells as we accelerated away from the cabin. Behind us, the Skinwalker recovered with unnatural speed, its form shifting into something quadrupedal and swift. The storm raged around us. Visibility reduced to mere feet, but Wells drove with the confidence of someone who knew every contour of the land. The snowmobile's headlight cut a narrow path through the swirling white. I glanced back and immediately wished I hadn't. The Skinwalker pursued us, running on all fours but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements too fluid for anything with a proper skeleton. It was gaining. Faster! I shouted over the wind. Any faster and we hit a tree. Wells called back, but he opened the throttle regardless. We burst from the tree line onto the open valley floor, a vast white expanse where the wind had scoured the snow into rippling dunes. Here, Wells really opened up the engine, and for a precious few minutes we pulled ahead of our pursuer. But the respite was brief. The Skinwalker adapted, its form streamlining, becoming something built for speed. It closed the distance with terrifying swiftness. "It's coming!" I warned. Wells didn't look back. "Check my saddlebag. Left side." I rummaged through it one-handed, my other arm locked around his waist. My fingers closed around a cylindrical object, a road flare. "Use it," Wells shouted. I struck the flare as the Skinwalker drew alongside us, close enough that I could see the constantly shifting features of its face. The flare ignited with a chemical hiss, burning magnesium bright. I thrust it toward the creature. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The Skinwalker recoiled as though struck, its form destabilizing momentarily into something smoke-like and amorphous. It fell behind, howling in rage and pain. "It worked," I cried. "Not for long," Wells replied grimly. "How many flares in there?" I checked. 3 more. "Make them count." We raced on through the storm, the landscape ghostly and unreal in the snowmobile's headlight. Occasionally I'd glance back to see the Skinwalker, sometimes close, sometimes distant, but always following. I used another flare when it got too near, buying us precious minutes. Dawn seemed an eternity away, the night vast and impenetrable. My fingers and face went numb despite my improved clothing. Wells had insisted I wear his spare parka. The older man hunched over the handlebars, his determination evident in every line of his body. We were making good time, but the Skinwalker was tireless. We had half a tank of fuel, 2 flares, and miles of wilderness still to cross. "Look," Wells suddenly shouted, pointing ahead. At first I saw nothing through the driving snow. Then, pinpricks of light in the distance, buildings, the park headquarters complex. Hope surged, giving me renewed strength. We were going to make it. Then the snowmobile's engine sputtered. "No, no, no," Wells muttered, adjusting the throttle. The engine caught, then sputtered again. Fuel lines freezing. Behind us, the Skinwalker sensed our vulnerability. It put on a burst of impossible speed, rapidly closing the distance. "Last flare," I warned, striking it and holding it ready. The engine died completely. We coasted to a stop in the middle of the valley, still a mile from headquarters. The Skinwalker slowed its approach, circling us in ever-tightening spirals, knowing we were trapped. "We'll have to make a stand," Wells said. Dismounting and drawing his rifle, I joined him. Back-to-back flare in one hand, obsidian knife in the other. The Skinwalker continued circling, a darker shadow in the pre-dawn darkness. "You've led me on quite a chase, Ahanu," it called, its voice carrying unnaturally through the storm. "Your grandfather would be proud." "Don't listen to it," Wells murmured. "It lies." The Skinwalker stopped circling, standing upright about 20 yards away. In the flare's red light, I could see it clearly, a nightmare amalgamation of human and animal features, its proportions constantly shifting and flowing. "The sun comes soon," it said conversationally. "I'll have to leave you then, but I'll find you again tomorrow night. And the next, it took a step closer, unless we make a deal." "What deal?" I couldn't help asking, ignoring Wells's warning look. The Skinwalker's face settled momentarily into a grotesque approximation of my grandfather's. "Join me, willingly. I'll spare your friend. I'll even spare those lights in the distance." It gestured toward headquarters. "A Skinwalker needs a territory, Ahanu. With you beside me, this could be ours." For one shameful moment I considered it. Not out of desire for power, but from exhaustion, the bone-deep weariness of being hunted, of watching others die while I ran. Perhaps surrender would spare others. Then I remembered my grandfather's words. Their gifts are poison. Their friendship is slavery. Never, I said firmly. The Skinwalker sighed, an eerily human sound. Then we do this the hard way. It charged. Wells fired, the rifle crack splitting the night. The bullet hit the creature center mass, staggering it momentarily but causing no lasting damage. I threw my flare directly at it. The Skinwalker dodged with impossible speed, but not before the flare singed its side. It howled, more in rage than pain. Then it was upon us. I slashed with the obsidian knife, feeling it connect with something solid. The Skinwalker backhanded me, sending me flying through the air. I landed hard in the snow, the breath knocked from my lungs. Wells was still fighting, swinging the rifle like a club, but the creature caught it, snapping the weapon in half. It lifted Wells by the throat. "No!" I screamed, struggling to my feet. In the east, a faint lightening of the sky. The first hint of approaching dawn. The Skinwalker noticed too. It glanced toward the horizon, then back at me, its grip on Wells never loosening. "A parting gift," it said, and with a casual motion it snapped Wells's neck. The door swung open. The Skinwalker stood silhouetted against the night, its form constantly shifting between human and something else. It stepped inside, confident in its power. "You've accepted your fate," it said, pleased. "Wiser than your grandfather." "I want to know something first," I replied, carefully maneuvering to position it before the mirror. "Why him? Why did you choose my grandfather?" The Skinwalker moved further into the room, unaware of my strategy. He was strong, knowledgeable in the old ways, like you. It tilted its head. "His power sustains me even now." "Show me," I challenged. "Show me his face one more time." The Skinwalker smiled, a terrible stretching of features, and began to transform. My grandfather's face emerged from the shifting mass, perfect in every detail. The sight broke my heart, but strengthened my resolve. "Look," I said, gesturing behind it. "See what you've become." It turned, catching sight of itself in the mirror. In the reflection, the illusion failed. Instead of my grandfather's face, the mirror showed something withered and ancient, a human face twisted by darkness and hunger. I recognized it instantly, not my grandfather, but his brother, my great-uncle, who had disappeared decades ago. Family legend said he'd gone to study with a shaman in Alaska and never returned. The truth was far darker. "Joseph Blackfeather," I said clearly, speaking my great-uncle's true name. "I see you." The Skinwalker screamed, a sound of rage and disbelief. It lunged for me, but its movements had become sluggish, as if moving through thick liquid. "Joseph Blackfeather," I repeated louder. "Blood of my blood, I release you from this form." The creature's body began to crack like dry clay, light spilling from the fissures. It howled, clawing at its own disintegrating flesh. "You cannot," it gasped, voice shifting between my great-uncle's and something inhuman. "I am eternal." "Nothing is eternal," I replied, thinking of Wells, of Thompson, of all those it had killed. "Not even you." With a sound like breaking glass, the Skinwalker shattered, not into pieces, but into light and shadow that dissipated like smoke. Where it had stood, a small pile of bones remained, human bones, ancient and weathered. My great-uncle's remains, the human who had transformed himself into a monster. I knelt beside them, exhaustion and relief washing over me in equal measure. Outside, I heard the Rangers approaching, drawn by the Skinwalker's final cry. "It's over," I told them as they burst through the door, weapons ready. "It's finally over." 3 months have passed since that night. Spring has come to Denali, the snow retreating to reveal the land beneath. I've remained as a ranger, though I requested transfer to a different sector, away from the places where too many memories linger. The official report lists an unidentified predator, possibly a bear hybrid, as responsible for the deaths. Few know the truth, and fewer would believe it. The elder returned to her village, but not before teaching me more of the old ways, knowledge I'd once dismissed, but now embrace. I visit Wells's grave weekly, bringing small offerings as my grandfather would have done. His sacrifice saved not just me, but countless others the Skinwalker would have hunted. At night, I still wake sometimes thinking I hear 3 knocks at my door. The shadows still seem to move with purpose in the corners of my vision. But these are just echoes, memories of fear rather than danger itself. Or so I tell myself. Because the elder's final warning stays with me. Where one Skinwalker walked, others may follow. The barriers between worlds grow thinner in places where death and power have mingled. And so I keep watch over these forests, these mountains. I listen when the land speaks. I remember the old ways. My name is Ahanu Blackfeather, and I guard the wilderness against things that should not exist. But sometimes in the deepest part of night, I wonder if something out there is watching me in return, patient, hungry, waiting for me to lower my guard. 3 knocks in the darkness, a voice that sounds like my own, and the long winter that will come again. The events I'm about to recount took place in the summer of 2019, but the memories remain as vivid and terrifying as if they happened yesterday. I was 23 at the time, fresh out of college and eager to celebrate my newfound freedom with a camping trip. My name is Michael, and I grew up in the rural outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama. I'd always been drawn to the great outdoors, spending countless weekends exploring the dense forests and winding trails that surrounded our family home. My father, a seasoned outdoorsman, had instilled in me a deep respect for nature and its untamed beauty, but he had also warned me of its dangers, both seen and unseen. It was a sweltering July afternoon when I received a call from my girlfriend, Jennifer. We'd been dating since our sophomore year of college, and our relationship had only grown stronger since graduation. Her voice crackled with excitement as she spoke. "Hey Mike, I was thinking, why don't we go on that camping trip we've been talking about? You know, to celebrate finishing school and all." I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "That sounds great, Jen. I've been itching to get out into the woods for a while now. When were you thinking? How about this weekend? I know it's short notice, but the weather forecast looks perfect." I paused, considering the logistics. This weekend could work. Let me reach out to Travis and see if he and Sadie want to join us. It'd be fun to make it a group thing. Travis had been my best friend since childhood. We'd grown up exploring the Alabama wilderness together, and I knew he'd jump at the chance for an outdoor adventure. His girlfriend Sadie, while less experienced in camping, was always up for trying new things. "Perfect," Jen exclaimed. "Let me know what they say. I'll start gathering supplies just in case." After hanging up, I immediately called Travis. As expected, he and Sadie were thrilled at the prospect of a weekend getaway. We quickly hashed out the details, agreeing to leave early Friday morning to make the most of our time. That evening, as I began packing my gear, my father knocked on my bedroom door. He leaned against the doorframe, a knowing smile on his weathered face. "Heading out for a camping trip, son?" I nodded, stuffing a handful of socks into my backpack. "Yeah, with Jen, Travis, and Sadie. We're thinking of trying out that spot you told me about last month. The one near Oakmount Creek?" My father's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of concern passing over his features. "Ah, that place. It's beautiful country out there, no doubt. But listen, Michael, be careful, all right? Those woods can be tricky, especially for folks who don't know them well." I chuckled, brushing off his concern. "Dad, come on. You taught me everything I know about camping. We'll be fine." He nodded slowly, but the worry didn't leave his eyes. I know. Just keep your wits about you and take that old flare gun of mine just in case. Sometimes a bright light is all you need to scare off any unwanted visitors." I agreed, more to ease his mind than out of any real concern. As he left my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling me. but I pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the excitement of the upcoming trip. The next morning dawned bright and clear. I loaded up my truck with our camping gear, double-checking that I had everything we might need: tents, sleeping bags, cookware, food, and plenty of water. As an afterthought, I tossed my father's old flare gun into the glove compartment. I picked up Jen first, her face beaming with anticipation as she tossed her backpack into the truck bed. Next, we swung by Travis and Sadie's apartment. The four of us hadn't been together since graduation, and the car soon filled with laughter and excited chatter as we caught up on each other's lives. As we left the outskirts of Birmingham behind, the landscape gradually changed. Suburban sprawl gave way to rolling hills and dense forests. The farther we drove, the more remote our surroundings became. By the time we turned onto the narrow dirt road that led to our campsite, we hadn't seen another vehicle for over an hour. "Man, your dad really wasn't kidding about this place being secluded," Travis remarked from the back seat, peering out at the thick canopy of trees that seemed to swallow the road. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter as we navigated the bumpy terrain. "Yeah," he said, "it's one of the least visited areas in the state park. Should have the whole place to ourselves." Sadie leaned forward, a mix of excitement and nervousness in her voice. "I've never been camping somewhere this remote before. It's kind of thrilling, isn't it? Like we're the only people for miles around." As she spoke, I caught Jen's eye. She smiled, but I could see a hint of unease in her expression. I reached over and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Don't worry," I said, addressing everyone in the car. "We've got everything we need, and I know these woods like the back of my hand. This is going to be a weekend we'll never forget." How right I was, though not in the way any of us could have possibly imagined. As we continued down that lonely road, deeper into the heart of the forest, none of us had any inkling of the horrors that awaited us. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, and for a brief moment, I felt a chill run down my spine despite the summer heat. If only we had turned back then. If only we had heeded the warnings our instincts were desperately trying to convey. But we were young, carefree, and utterly unprepared for what lay ahead in the depths of those ancient woods. After about an hour of driving down increasingly narrow and overgrown roads, we finally arrived at our destination. The clearing was just as my father had described it, a picturesque spot nestled between towering pines with a small creek bubbling nearby. As we stepped out of the truck, the air felt different here, thicker somehow and charged with an energy I couldn't quite explain. "This is perfect," Jen exclaimed, stretching her arms above her head and taking a deep breath of the pine-scented air. Travis and I began unloading the gear while Sadie and Jen scouted the best spots for our tents. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor. Despite the beauty of our surroundings, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. As I was setting up the first tent, Travis approached me, his voice low. "Hey, Mike, does something feel off to you?" I paused, relieved that I wasn't the only one sensing it. "Yeah, actually, I can't put my finger on it, but something doesn't feel quite right." Travis nodded, glancing around the clearing. "Probably just nerves. It's been a while since we've been out in the sticks like this." I forced a smile, trying to convince myself as much as him. "You're probably right. Let's just focus on getting camp set up before it gets dark." Over the next hour, we worked together to establish our campsite. 2 tents were pitched, a fire pit was dug and ringed with stones, and our supplies were organized. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, I set about starting a fire. "Need some help with that, Eagle Scout?" Jen teased, watching me arrange the kindling. I grinned up at her. "Just you watch. My dad taught me how to start a fire in any conditions." True to my word, I soon had a cheerful blaze going. As darkness fell, we gathered around the fire, the warmth and light creating a comforting bubble against the encroaching night. Sadie produced a bag of marshmallows, and soon we were laughing and joking, roasting them over the flames. "Hey," Jen said suddenly, "why don't we go for a swim?" That creek looked so inviting earlier. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon we were changed and making our way down to the water's edge. The creek was deeper than it had appeared, forming a natural pool perfect for swimming. We splashed and played in the cool water, our laughter echoing through the trees. After a while, Jen and I decided to take a walk along the creek bank, leaving Travis and Sadie to enjoy some alone time. As we strolled hand in hand, the sounds of the forest at night surrounded us, the chirping of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. But then, suddenly everything went quiet. The silence was so abrupt and complete that it felt like a physical presence. I stopped, every muscle in my body tensing. "Mike," Jen whispered, her grip on my hand tightening. "What's wrong?" I shook my head, straining my ears for any sound. "I don't know. It's just too quiet." As if in response to my words, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the trees. Jen gasped, pressing closer to me. I wrapped an arm around her, my eyes scanning the shadows. "We should head back to camp," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the fear coursing through me. We turned and began walking quickly back the way we had come. With each step I could feel eyes on us, watching from the darkness. The feeling of being observed was so intense that it took all my willpower not to break into a run. When we finally reached the campsite, Travis and Sadie were already there, looking as shaken as we felt. "Did you guys feel that?" Travis asked as soon as we came into view. "It was like something was watching us," I finished for him. He nodded, his face pale in the firelight. We huddled closer to the fire, all pretense of carefree enjoyment gone. As we sat in tense silence, Travis cleared his throat. "You know," he began hesitantly, "this reminds me of something my dad once told me. He used to hunt in these woods, and one time he came home looking like he'd seen a ghost." We all leaned in, eager for any explanation of the eerie atmosphere that had descended upon us. "He said he heard voices out in the woods," Travis continued, "and he saw something. He described it as looking like a man, but with impossibly long arms and fingers like claws. Said it looked starved but strong, and it had these antlers growing out of its head." Sadie shuddered. "That sounds like some kind of monster from a fairy tale." I wanted to agree with her, to dismiss it as just another campfire story. But the memory of that oppressive silence, of those unseen eyes watching us from the darkness, made it impossible to completely disregard Travis's tale. "Whatever your dad saw," I said slowly, "I think we should be extra careful. No one goes off alone, okay? We stick together." Everyone nodded in agreement. We stayed up late into the night, keeping the fire burning bright, each of us too unnerved to suggest turning in. It wasn't until the first hint of dawn began to lighten the sky that we finally retreated to our tents, exhausted but too wired to sleep. I must have dozed off at some point because I awoke with a start, my heart pounding. The inside of the tent was dim, suggesting it was still early morning. Beside me, Jen stirred but didn't wake. I lay still, trying to identify what had jolted me from sleep. Then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, somewhere between a growl and a moan. It seemed to come from just outside our tent. My breath caught in my throat as I strained my ears, hoping I had imagined it. But there it was again, closer this time. Slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, I reached for the flashlight we had kept nearby. My fingers had just closed around it when something brushed against the side of the tent. The fabric bulged inward as if something large was pressing against it. I bit back a scream, my whole body rigid with fear. The thing outside moved again, and this time I could make out the shape of what looked like a hand, but far too large, with fingers that seemed unnaturally long and sharp. In that moment, survival instinct took over. I clicked on the flashlight, aiming its beam at the side of the tent. The shape outside recoiled instantly, and I heard a hiss of pain or surprise. Without pausing to think, I unzipped the tent flap and burst out, flashlight held high. The beam of light swept across the clearing, illuminating trees and underbrush, but whatever had been there was gone. Yet the feeling of being watched remained, more intense than ever. "Mike?" Jen's voice came from inside the tent, thick with sleep and confusion. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, Travis emerged from the other tent, looking alert and worried. "You guys okay?" "I thought I heard something." I nodded, still scanning the tree line. "There was something right outside our tent. I didn't get a good look, but..." I trailed off, not sure how to describe what I had sensed rather than seen. How could I explain the sheer wrongness of that half-glimpsed shape? By now, Jen and Sadie had joined us, and we huddled together in the pre-dawn gloom, recounting what had happened. As I spoke, I could see the fear growing in their eyes, mirroring my own. "We need to leave," Sadie said firmly once I had finished. "This isn't right. Something dangerous is out there." Part of me wanted to agree, to pack up and flee from whatever was lurking in these woods. But another part, the part that had been raised on my father's stories of wilderness survival, resisted. "It's not safe to travel these roads in the dark," I argued. "We should wait until full daylight, then pack up and go." After some debate, we agreed to my plan. None of us wanted to go back into the tents, so we rebuilt the fire and sat close together, jumping at every sound from the surrounding forest. As the sky slowly lightened, we began to relax slightly. The normal sounds of the forest returned: bird song, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. By the time the sun had fully risen, casting long shadows across our campsite, we had almost convinced ourselves that the night's events had been a product of overactive imaginations. Maybe it was just some animal, Jen suggested as we ate a hurried breakfast. A bear or a mountain lion. I wanted to believe her, but the memory of that impossibly large hand pressed against our tent kept intruding. Still, in the light of day, it was easier to be rational. "You're probably right," I said, forcing a smile. "But I think we should still pack up and head out. Better safe than sorry, right?" We all agreed and set about breaking down the campsite. As we worked, the mood lightened considerably. Travis even cracked a few jokes about urban kids being spooked by squirrels, which had us all laughing. It wasn't until we were almost finished packing that things went horribly wrong. Sadie had gone to fill our water bottles one last time at the creek. We heard her scream, a sound of pure terror that cut through the morning air like a knife. Without hesitation, we all ran toward the sound. We found Sadie standing at the edge of the creek, her face ashen, pointing at something on the opposite bank. As I followed her gaze, my blood ran cold. There, clearly visible in the mud, was a footprint. But it was like no footprint I had ever seen before. It was huge, easily twice the size of a man's foot, with long claw-like toes, and next to it, pressed deep into the soft earth, was the unmistakable impression of a hand with fingers nearly a foot long, ending in sharp points. We stood there, frozen in horror, staring at the undeniable evidence that something inhuman was sharing these woods with us. The cheerful morning sun suddenly seemed cold and distant, and the forest around us took on a menacing aspect. "We need to leave," Travis said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now," no one argued. We practically ran back to our campsite, grabbing our belongings and throwing them haphazardly into the truck. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made us flinch and look around wildly. As I was tossing the last bag into the truck bed, I heard it, a low, keening cry that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a sound of hunger, of rage, of otherworldly malevolence. "Get in the truck!" I yelled, scrambling for the driver's seat. The others piled in, and I gunned the engine before all the doors were even closed. As we sped down the rough dirt road, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. Something large and dark moved at the edge of the clearing we had just left. I pressed harder on the accelerator, the truck bouncing and shuddering on the uneven ground. We drove in tense silence, each lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what we had seen and heard. It wasn't until we reached the main road, the pavement smooth beneath our tires, that anyone spoke. "What was that thing?" Jen asked, her voice shaky. I shook my head, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I don't know, but I think we're lucky to have gotten out of there when we did." The drive back to Birmingham was tense, to say the least. Every few minutes, one of us would glance back, half expecting to see some monstrous shape loping after the truck. The forest seemed to press in on both sides of the road, the trees forming a dark tunnel that we couldn't escape fast enough. "Do you think it followed us?" Sadie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. "I don't know, but let's not take any chances. We'll head straight to my place. It's closest." No one argued. We were all too shaken, too desperate for the safety of familiar surroundings. As we neared the outskirts of the city, I began to relax slightly. The dense forest gave way to scattered houses, then suburbs. The nightmare of the woods seemed to recede with each mile of civilized land we covered. That's when I noticed the truck behind us. It was an old model, rust-eaten and dented, its headlights blazing despite the bright afternoon sun, and it was following us way too closely. "Guys," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "don't look now, but I think we're being followed." Of course, they all immediately turned to look. Jen gasped, and Travis muttered a curse under his breath. "It's probably nothing," I said, not believing my own words. "Just some jerk tailgating us." I took a sudden turn onto a side street, hoping to lose our pursuer. The truck behind us matched our move perfectly, still riding our bumper. "Okay, definitely not nothing," Travis said, his voice tight with fear. I pressed down harder on the accelerator, taking random turns through residential streets. The truck stayed with us, matching our every move. In the rearview mirror, I caught a glimpse of the driver, or rather, where the driver should have been. The cab of the truck seemed empty, the steering wheel moving on its own. "Oh God," Jen whimpered, having seen the same thing I had. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. We couldn't keep this up forever. Sooner or later we'd hit a dead end or run out of gas. And then what? Suddenly I remembered something. The flare gun my father had insisted I bring. It was still in the glove compartment. "Jen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "In the glove compartment, there's a flare gun. Get it out." She fumbled with the latch, her hands shaking, but managed to retrieve the gun. "Now what?" "When I say so, I want you to lean out the window and fire it at that truck. Aim for the windshield." It was a desperate plan, but it was all I had. I waited until we reached a stretch of road with no other cars or pedestrians around. "Now," I yelled. Jen leaned out the window, aimed as best she could, and pulled the trigger. The flare shot out with a loud pop, trailing sparks as it arced through the air. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it would miss. Then it hit the pursuing truck's windshield with a brilliant flash of light. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The truck swerved violently, an inhuman shriek of pain emanating from it. It veered off the road, crashing into a row of parked cars before coming to a stop. "Don't look back," I shouted, flooring the accelerator. "Just hold on." We sped through the city streets, taking a convoluted route back to my house. By the time we pulled into my driveway, we were all breathing hard, adrenaline coursing through our veins. We practically fell out of the truck, rushing into the house and locking the door behind us. Only then did we allow ourselves to process what had just happened. What the hell was that? Travis demanded, pacing back and forth in my living room. That thing. It followed us all the way from the woods. I shook my head, still trying to make sense of it all. "I don't know, but I think we need to tell someone." "The police, maybe?" Sadie laughed, a hysterical edge to her voice. "And tell them what? That we were chased by a ghost truck driven by some kind of monster? They'll think we're insane." She had a point. Who would believe such an outlandish story? But we couldn't just do nothing. Whatever that thing was, it was still out there. And it knew where we lived now. We need to stick together, I said finally. At least for tonight. We'll figure out what to do in the morning. Everyone agreed, too shaken to want to be alone. We spent a sleepless night huddled in my living room, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment, that thing from the woods would come crashing through the windows. But morning came without incident, the sun rising on a world that seemed deceptively normal. As we sat around my kitchen table, nursing cups of strong coffee, we tried to make sense of what had happened. We can't just pretend this didn't happen, I said, breaking the tense silence that had fallen over us. That thing, whatever it is still out there, and it knows where we live now. Travis nodded grimly. Mike's right. We need to figure out what we're dealing with here. Jen, who had been quiet all morning, finally spoke up. But how? It's not like we can Google monster that chases people in ghost trucks, can we? Despite the seriousness of the situation, we all chuckled at that. The laughter, however brief, helped to ease some of the tension. Actually, Sadie said, a thoughtful look on her face. Maybe we can. Not Google specifically, but Travis. Didn't you say your dad had an encounter in those woods years ago? Travis's eyes widened with realization. You're right. He never liked to talk about it much, but maybe he'd be willing to now, given what's happened to us. It was a lead, at least. We decided that Travis and Sadie would go talk to his father, while Jen and I would hit the local library to see if we could find any historical accounts of similar occurrences in the area. We spent the rest of the day gathering supplies. Flashlights with extra batteries, a few hunting knives, my dad's old shotgun. Travis managed to borrow a night vision camera from a friend, no questions asked. We packed food and water, first aid supplies, and warm clothes. As night fell, we tried to get some sleep, knowing we'd need our strength for what lay ahead. But rest was elusive. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside, had us starting awake, convinced the Wendigo had found us. Morning came, gray and overcast. We loaded up the truck in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As I started the engine, I looked at each of my friends in turn. Jen, her face pale but determined. Travis, jaw set with grim resolve. Sadie, eyes wide with fear but unwavering. Last chance to back out, I said, even though I knew what their answer would be. Just drive, Travis said, speaking for all of us. As we headed out of town, back towards the forest that had become our nightmare, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were driving towards our doom. But we had no choice. The Wendigo had to be stopped, no matter the cost. The drive back to the campsite was tense, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The forest seemed to close in around us as we drove deeper into its heart, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. By the time we reached the clearing where we had camped just days ago, the sun was already setting, casting long shadows across the ground. We got out of the truck slowly, every sense on high alert. The clearing looked just as we had left it, but there was an undeniable feeling of wrongness in the air. A heaviness that pressed down on us, making it hard to breathe. Okay, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We stick together. No one goes off alone, no matter what. Travis, you've got the camera. Jen, you take the shotgun. Sadie, you're on flashlight duty. I'll take point with the hunting knife. We moved into the forest, our footsteps unnaturally loud in the eerie silence. No birds sang, no insects chirped. It was as if all life had fled from this place, leaving only us and the thing we hunted. For hours we searched. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves had us spinning around, weapons raised. But we found nothing, no tracks, no signs of the creature's passage. It was maddening. As midnight approached, we found ourselves back at the creek where Sadie had seen the footprint. The water burbled softly, the only sound in the oppressive silence of the forest. Maybe we should head back, Sadie whispered, her voice tight with fear. It's not here. We should... She never finished her sentence. From somewhere in the darkness came a sound that froze the blood in our veins, a low, guttural growl that was unmistakably inhuman. "Run!" I yelled, but it was too late. It came at us from the shadows, a blur of pale, emaciated limbs and razor-sharp claws. In the beam of Sadie's flashlight, I caught a glimpse of its face, gaunt and skeletal, with empty black eyes and antlers sprouting from its skull. Jen fired the shotgun, the blast deafeningly loud in the quiet forest. The creature shrieked, more in rage than pain, and lunged at her. I tackled it, feeling its cold, leathery skin beneath my hands. We tumbled to the ground, rolling dangerously close to the creek's edge. "The camera!" I shouted to Travis. "Get it on film!" As we grappled, I could hear Travis fumbling with the camera, Jen reloading the shotgun, Sadie's panicked breathing. The Wendigo was incredibly strong, its long arms wrapping around me like steel bands. Its face was inches from mine, jaw unhinged to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. In that moment, staring into the abyss of its eyes, I saw something that chilled me to my core. Behind the hunger, behind the inhuman rage, there was a flicker of intelligence. This wasn't just some mindless beast. It was thinking, planning. With a surge of desperate strength, I managed to break free of its grasp. I scrambled backwards, my hand closing around a rock on the creek bed. As the creature lunged at me again, I swung with all my might, catching it square in the temple. The Wendigo staggered, momentarily stunned. In that instant, Jen fired again, the buckshot tearing into its chest. It howled, a sound of pain and fury that seemed to shake the very trees around us. And then, impossibly, it spoke. "You cannot kill me," it rasped, its voice like dead leaves rustling in the wind. "I am eternal. I am hunger itself." "Maybe we can't kill you," I said, getting to my feet, "but we can stop you." I lunged forward, driving my hunting knife deep into its chest. The Wendigo screamed, a sound of such primal agony that we all instinctively covered our ears. It thrashed wildly, its claws raking across my arm, leaving deep gashes. And then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. It leapt away into the darkness of the forest, leaving behind only the echoes of its scream and a trail of black, viscous blood. We stood there, panting and shell-shocked, for what felt like hours. Finally, Travis broke the silence. "I got it," he said, his voice shaky but triumphant. "I got it all on camera." We looked at each other, battered and bloodied but alive. We had faced the nightmare and survived. We had our proof. But as we made our way back to the truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The Wendigo was still out there, wounded but alive, and something told me it wouldn't forget us anytime soon. The drive back to Birmingham was a blur. We were exhausted, running on pure adrenaline and the desperate need to put as much distance between us and those woods as possible. By the time we pulled into my driveway, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. We stumbled into the house, locking the door behind us. For a long moment, we just stood there in the living room, looking at each other. We were alive against all odds, but the horror of what we had experienced hung over us like a shroud. "What now?" Sadie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. Now we get that footage to someone who can help. Someone outside of the county. Someone we can trust. Travis nodded, clutching the camera like a lifeline. "I have an uncle in the FBI. He might be able to help." We spent the next few hours making calls, sending emails, doing everything we could to get our story out there. We uploaded copies of the footage to secure servers, sent encrypted messages to journalists and law enforcement agencies outside of Alabama. But even as we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every car that drove by the house, every shadow that moved outside the windows, set my heart racing. The Wendigo might be wounded, but it wasn't dead, and its human allies were still out there. Days passed in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. We stayed together, too afraid to be alone. Travis's uncle in the FBI promised to look into our story, but warned us to be careful. If what you're saying is true, he told us over a secure line, you've stumbled onto something big, something dangerous. A week after our encounter in the woods, we got our first real break. A reporter from a national news outlet reached out, wanting to do a story on our experience. We agreed to meet her at a diner just outside of Birmingham. As we sat in a booth, nursing cups of coffee and glancing nervously at the door, I couldn't help but feel exposed. What if this was a trap? What if the reporter was working for them? But when she arrived, my fears were put to rest. She listened to our story with growing horror and disbelief, examining the footage on Travis's laptop. "This is incredible," she said finally, "and terrifying. If this is real, and I believe you when you say it is, it could change everything." We left the diner feeling hopeful for the first time in days. Our story was going to get out. People would know the truth. But our relief was short-lived. That night, as we slept fitfully in my living room, we were awakened by the sound of breaking glass. Men in black tactical gear swarmed into the house, weapons drawn. "On the ground, now," one of them shouted. As I was forced face down onto the floor, hands zip-tied behind my back, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. One of the men had pushed up his sleeve to reveal a tattoo, an intricate design that looked unsettlingly like the Wendigo's face. They took us away in separate vehicles, black bags over our heads. I could hear Jen screaming my name as they dragged her away. Hours later, I found myself in a dimly lit room, facing a man in an expensive suit. His smile was cold, predatory. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I think it's time we had a chat about what you and your friends saw in those woods." As he spoke, I realized with growing horror that our nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The Wendigo's influence reached farther than we could have ever imagined. This happened in the 1996. I found myself settling into a patch of rugged forest land in northern Idaho, a place most people wouldn't bother with. But then again, I've never been like most people. My name's Lowell Krell, and I like my space, especially since I'd spent half my life putting up with other people's nonsense. This spot up near the Cabinet Mountains was perfect. No neighbors, no traffic, just me and the thick woods. After bouncing around jobs in small towns, everything from carpentry to construction, I decided to live off the grid. Simpler, I thought, fewer headaches. I'd been living in that cabin for about 5 years by the time things got strange. I wasn't armed, not because I was against it, but more because I'd never felt the need to be. Truth is, when you're out here for long enough, you get used to the quiet. You start to recognize the sounds the woods make, and after a while, anything out of the ordinary just stands out. I'm talking things like how the wind whistles through the pines, or the sound of the river rushing down the rocks. That's why when something doesn't belong, you notice it immediately. And that's what happened one evening just after sunset. I was chopping wood out back when I heard a crack in the brush. Not the kind that comes from a squirrel darting through the undergrowth, but something heavy. Big. I looked up, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and listened for a minute. At first I thought it was a deer, maybe an elk. There's plenty of wildlife up here, though nothing really dangerous, unless you're stupid enough to corner a moose. But this was different. The silence afterward was thick, unnatural, like the whole forest had stopped breathing. That's when I got the first feeling something wasn't right. Figuring it was nothing, I went inside, made myself some coffee, and sat by the small window that faced the forest. That's when I saw movement again, something fast darting between the trees. It was too quick to make out clearly, but big enough that it caught my attention. I cracked a joke to myself, something about maybe needing glasses, but it didn't quite land. There was no laughter in the air, just that heavy quiet. An hour later, the noises started again, only now it was closer. Something heavy was moving just outside my cabin, but every time I got to the window, it stopped. I kept telling myself it was just some curious animal, maybe a bear, but there was a part of me that knew better. When the noise started up a third time, I grabbed the flashlight, stepped outside, and scanned the tree line. For a second, everything was still. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shape, low to the ground, like it was crouching but large enough that it shouldn't have been able to move that fast. I yelled something, probably not the smartest move, but whatever it was stopped dead in its tracks. There was a low rustling sound, like leaves being dragged across the ground, and then silence again. I was frozen in place, flashlight beam dancing along the edge of the forest, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. Not yet, anyway. The next day I found tracks. They were deep, spaced far apart, almost like whatever it was had a long stride. But what really got me was that they weren't shaped like any animal I knew. They were sort of round at the front, but tapered off toward the back with odd claw marks digging into the dirt. My first thought was maybe a mountain lion, but I've seen those tracks before. This wasn't even close. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who spooks easy. I've been around nature long enough to know what's what. But these tracks, they weren't anything I recognized, and that didn't sit right with me. Still, I tried to shake it off, kept myself busy with work around the cabin, and chalked the whole thing up to a trick of the light. I mean, what else could it be? But that night, everything went to hell. It was just after midnight when I woke up to the sound of something scraping against the cabin. Not gentle, like a branch brushing the wood. This was deliberate, like claws dragging along the side of the house. I sat up, heart pounding, and reached for the flashlight. The scraping stopped, but before I could even get out of bed, something slammed against the wall hard. The whole cabin shook, and I swear I could feel the floorboards vibrate beneath me. I grabbed my boots and pulled them on, fumbling to get the flashlight in my hand. Another thud, this one stronger, rattled the window above my head. I flicked on the light and headed for the door, thinking maybe I'd scare whatever it was away. But when I stepped outside, I was met with a sight that I still can't quite shake from my mind. There it was, hunched over in the clearing about 30 feet from the cabin, its back to me. It was huge. Bigger than any bear I'd ever seen, but not shaped like one. Its body was long, lean, covered in some kind of coarse, matted hair. The legs were bent like it was crouching, and I could see muscles rippling under the skin as it moved, slow and deliberate. But it was the arms, if you could call them that made my stomach drop. They were long, too long, like those of a primate, but the way they ended in twisted, sharp-looking claws. That's when I realized I wasn't looking at any animal I'd ever seen before. I was rooted to the spot, not knowing whether to run or to stay and hope it didn't see me. My brain was doing that thing where it just refuses to process what's right in front of you because it doesn't make sense. And then, as if it sensed me, the thing turned. It's hard to explain what I saw in that moment. It was like a cross between a large feral dog and something else entirely, something wrong. Its face was elongated, almost canine but distorted, twisted with patches of fur missing. The mouth, full of jagged teeth that didn't fit right, as though they'd grown in all at once, crowding out its jaw. I stood there, flashlight beam shaking as I tried to make sense of it. I heard a loud snap, and that's when it lunged, straight at me. Faster than anything that size had a right to move. I bolted back into the cabin, slamming the door behind me, but the thing hit the wall hard enough to knock the lamp off the table. I grabbed the closest thing I had, an axe, and stood there, back against the door, waiting for it to bust through. But it didn't. Instead, I heard it circling the cabin, scraping its claws along the walls, the windows, like it was testing the place, looking for a weak spot. For the next hour, it kept at it, circling, pacing, but never quite coming back to the door. I stood there, waiting for it to break in, my knuckles white around the axe handle. Then, just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was like the whole forest had gone back to sleep, and I was left standing there alone in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I spent the next few hours sitting by the window, watching, waiting for it to come back. But it didn't. Not then, anyway. The next morning I found fresh tracks, deeper this time, leading away from the cabin and into the woods. They didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. I took a picture, thinking maybe I'd show it to someone, anyone, who could tell me what I was dealing with. But part of me knew that even with proof, no one would believe me. That evening, I packed up whatever I could carry and started the long hike down to the nearest town. I didn't look back. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't something I wanted to face again, not alone. A few days later, I got word that a hunter had gone missing in those same woods, not far from where my cabin stood. They found his remains scattered across a small clearing, and from what I heard, the authorities couldn't explain what had killed him. They didn't even try, and that's where I left it. I haven't been back to that cabin since. If you ask me, there's a reason those woods are as empty as they are. There's something out there, something that doesn't belong. But the story doesn't end there. I wish it did, but life isn't that simple, especially when you've seen something you can't explain, something that shouldn't exist. I spent the next few weeks in a small motel on the outskirts of the nearest town, a place called Pine Haven. It wasn't much, just a run-down collection of cabins that had seen better days, but it was better than being out there in the woods. I kept to myself mostly. The owner, a grizzled old-timer named Frank, didn't ask questions, which suited me just fine. But word travels fast in small towns, and it wasn't long before people started talking. They'd heard about the hunter, of course. In a place like this, news like that spreads like wildfire. But then they started asking about me. The hermit from the mountains, they called me. The one who came down with wild stories about monsters in the woods. I tried to keep my head down, to blend in. But it's not easy when you're the new face in town, and you've got a story like mine. People would come to the diner where I'd grab my meals, sit down uninvited, and start peppering me with questions. What did I see? Was it a bear, a wolf, something else? I kept my mouth shut for the most part. What was I supposed to say? That I'd seen some kind of creature that shouldn't exist? That it had nearly broken down my cabin door? That its eyes had been filled with an intelligence that no animal should possess? They'd think I was crazy. Hell, sometimes I thought I was crazy. But then the dream started. It always began the same way. I'd be back in my cabin chopping wood like I had been that first night. The air would be thick with the scent of pine and the sound of my axe striking wood. But then, just like before, I'd hear that crack in the brush. Only this time, when I turned to look, it wouldn't be empty forest staring back at me. It would be there, crouched at the edge of the clearing, its eyes fixed on me. In the dream, I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, axe forgotten in my hands, as the thing slowly unfolded itself. It would rise up, 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 until it towered over me, its twisted form blocking out the sun. And then it would speak. Not in words, not exactly. It was more like I could feel its thoughts pressing against my mind, alien and cold. In that moment, I understood that this wasn't just some animal. This was something old, something that had been here long before us, and would be here long after we were gone. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the echo of its alien thoughts still rattling around in my head. The dreams came every night, each one more vivid than the last. I started avoiding sleep, staying up late into the night, nursing cup after cup of black coffee at the all-night diner. That's where I met her. The waitress, I mean. She'd been working there for years, she told me. Seen all sorts come through town. But there was something about the way she looked at me, like she knew there was more to my story than I was letting on. "You're him, aren't you?" she asked one night, sliding a fresh cup of coffee across the counter. "The one from up in the mountains." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "My granddad used to tell stories about those woods. Said there were things up there that no one could explain. Things that had been there since before the first settlers arrived." I looked up at her. Really looked at her for the first time. She was older than I'd first thought, lines etched deep around her eyes and mouth. But those eyes, they were sharp, intelligent. She'd seen things too, I realized. What kind of things? I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. She shook her head. He never said exactly. Just that they were old and hungry. She paused, glancing around the empty diner, and that they didn't like it when people started moving into their territory. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why are you telling me this? She shrugged, but there was tension in the set of her shoulders. Because you've seen it, haven't you? And now it's seen you. I didn't answer. I couldn't, but she must have seen something in my face because she nodded almost to herself. Be careful, she said, turning to go. Once they notice you, they don't forget. I sat there for a long time after she left, staring into my coffee cup. The dreams, the creature, the warning, it was all starting to feel like too much. Part of me wanted to run, to get in my truck and drive as far away from this place as I could. But another part, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever I'd seen up in those woods, whatever had seen me, it wasn't going to let me go that easily. Weeks passed. The dreams continued, each one more vivid than the last. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. Quick movements, shadows where there shouldn't be shadows. More than once I caught myself staring out into the woods that bordered the town, sure that I'd seen something moving among the trees. I knew I was losing it. Lack of sleep, stress, maybe even some kind of delayed shock from what I'd experienced up in the mountains. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to deal with. It was Frank, the motel owner, who finally confronted me about it. He caught me one morning as I was coming back from another sleepless night at the diner. "You can't keep going on like this," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Whatever you're running from, son, it's catching up to you." I wanted to laugh. If only he knew. But instead I just nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I know." He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "Look, I've got a buddy who works for the Forest Service. Maybe he can help you make sense of what you saw up there." I hesitated. The idea of talking to someone official about what I'd seen, it made my stomach churn. But at the same time, I was desperate for answers, for someone to tell me I wasn't crazy. "Okay," I said finally. "Set it up." The forest ranger's name was Bill Hawkins. He was a tall, lean man with a weather-beaten face and eyes that had seen a lot. We met at the ranger station, a small wooden building on the outskirts of town. "Frank tells me you had some trouble up in the mountains," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. I nodded, suddenly unsure of where to begin. How do you tell someone that you've seen a monster? But as I started talking, describing that first night, the tracks, the attack on my cabin, I saw something change in Hawkins' eyes. He leaned forward, his expression intense. "You're sure about what you saw?" he asked when I'd finished. "The size, the way it moved?" I nodded. "I know how it sounds, but—" He held up a hand, cutting me off. "I believe you." Those 3 words hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until that moment. "You're not the first," Hawkins continued. "We don't talk about it much, but every few years, we get reports, sightings, things that don't fit with what we know about the wildlife in these parts." He got up, moving to a filing cabinet in the corner of the room. After a moment of searching, he pulled out a thick folder. "Most of it's explainable," he said, dropping the folder on the desk between us. "Bears, wolves, even the occasional mountain lion. But some of it—" He flipped open the folder, and I found myself looking at a collection of photos, reports, and hand-drawn sketches. Some of them were clearly just animals, like he'd said, but others— There was a photo, grainy and out of focus, but I recognized the shape immediately. Long limbs, hunched posture, that unmistakable elongated face. It was like looking at a snapshot from my nightmares. "What is it?" I asked, my mouth dry. Hawkins shook his head. "We don't know. Some of the old-timers, the native folks who've been here for generations, they have stories, but nothing concrete. He leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. What I do know is that whatever it is, it's been here a long time, and it doesn't like us encroaching on its territory. I thought about what the waitress had said, about things that had been in these woods since before the settlers arrived. So what do we do? Hawkins sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Officially, nothing. We can't exactly put out an alert for an unidentified creature that most people don't believe exists. Unofficially, he paused, seemingly weighing his words. We keep an eye out. We warn people to be careful in the backcountry, and we hope it keeps its distance. But I knew, deep in my gut, that wasn't going to be enough. Not for me, anyway. Whatever this thing was, it had seen me. And if my dreams were anything to go by, it wasn't done with me yet. I need to go back, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Hawkins looked at me sharply. That's not a good idea, son. Whatever you saw up there is still out there, I finished for him. And it's not going to leave me alone until I face it. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he nodded. I can't stop you, but I'm not letting you go up there alone. Give me a day to arrange some time off. We'll go together. I wanted to argue, to tell him this was my fight. But the truth was, the idea of going back up to those mountains alone terrified me. So I nodded, grateful for the company. The next day passed in a blur of preparation. Hawkins provided some basic gear, a better flashlight, a handheld radio, even an old rifle that he insisted I take just in case. I spent the evening in my motel room, trying to sleep but mostly just staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with what-ifs and maybes. We set out at dawn, Hawkins' Forest Service truck winding its way up the rough mountain roads. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees pressing close to the road, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. As we neared my old cabin, a sense of dread settled over me. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No birdsong, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting. We pulled up to the cabin just as the sun was reaching its zenith. It looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile. The door hung askew on its hinges, and deep gouges marred the wooden walls. Something's been here, Hawkins muttered, his hand resting on the butt of his service pistol. We approached cautiously, Hawkins taking the lead. The interior of the cabin was a mess, furniture overturned, my few possessions scattered across the floor. And everywhere, that same acrid scent I remembered from that night, like wet dog and something else, something I couldn't quite place. Look, Hawkins said, pointing to the far wall. There, carved deep into the wood, were 3 parallel lines. Claw marks, but bigger than any animal should be capable of making. I felt my heart rate pick up, my palms growing sweaty. It's been here, recently. Hawkins nodded grimly. We should... But whatever he was about to say was cut off by a sound from outside. A low, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the very air around us. We turned as one, facing the open doorway. And there, silhouetted against the afternoon sun, was a shape I'd hoped I'd never see again. It was bigger than I remembered, its massive form blocking out the light. Those long, twisted arms ended in claws that dug into the earth, leaving deep furrows in the soil. Its face, that horrible, elongated muzzle filled with jagged teeth, was fixed on us with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. For a long moment, nobody moved. It was like the whole world was frozen, caught in this impossible moment where reality and nightmare collided. Then Hawkins moved, his hand going for his gun. But he was too slow. The creature lunged forward with impossible speed. I saw a blur of motion, heard Hawkins cry out, and then I was alone, face to face with the thing from my nightmares. It towered over me, its hot breath washing over my face. I could see my own terrified reflection in its dark, alien eyes. And in that moment, I understood what true fear was. But then something strange happened. Instead of attacking, the creature hesitated. Its head tilted to one side, almost quizzically. And then, just like in my dreams, I felt something press against my mind. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like impressions, flashes of images and emotions. Ancient forests, deep caves, the passage of countless years. Loneliness, curiosity, and underneath it all, a deep, primal hunger. I don't know how long we stood there, locked in that silent communion. It could have been seconds or hours, but eventually, slowly, the pressure on my mind eased. The creature took a step back, then another. Its gaze never left mine as it retreated to the edge of the clearing. And then, in a movement almost too fast to follow, it was gone, disappearing into the depths of the forest. I stood there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. It was Hawkins' groan that finally snapped me out of it. I rushed to his side, relieved to find him battered but alive. As we made our way back down the mountain, supporting each other, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The creature, whatever it was, hadn't just been a mindless beast. It had been intelligent, ancient, and terrifyingly alien. And it had let us go. I never returned to that cabin, never went back to those woods. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind whispers through the trees, I swear I can still feel the echo of that alien mind touching mine. A reminder that there are things in this world beyond our understanding, ancient and powerful, and they're watching us. In the days following our encounter, I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions and unanswered questions. Hawkins and I had made it back to town, battered and shaken but alive. We'd spun a tale of a bear attack to explain our injuries. It was easier than trying to describe what we'd actually seen. Who would have believed us anyway? Hawkins was hospitalized for a few days, treated for deep lacerations and a mild concussion. I visited him daily, both of us trying to make sense of what had happened up there in the mountains. We spoke in hushed tones, aware of the curious ears of nurses and other patients. "What do you think it wanted?" I asked him on one of these visits, my voice barely above a whisper. Hawkins shook his head, wincing slightly at the movement. "I don't know, Lowell. In all my years in these woods, I've never seen anything like that. Never even heard stories of something quite like it." I nodded, thinking back to that moment when the creature's mind had touched mine. It was intelligent, not just animal instinct. There was something more. Hawkins studied me for a long moment. "You had some kind of connection with it, didn't you? I saw the way it looked at you." I hesitated, then nodded slowly. It was like it was trying to communicate. Not with words, but with feelings, images. It was overwhelming. "What did it show you?" I closed my eyes, trying to recall the flood of impressions that had washed over me. Age, so much age. It's been here for, I don't know, maybe centuries. And loneliness. A deep, profound loneliness. Hawkins was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "Do you think there are more of them?" The question sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't even considered that possibility. I don't know. I hope not. As Hawkins recovered, I found myself unable to shake the experience. The dreams continued, but they were different now. Instead of the terrifying nightmares I'd been having, these were calmer. I saw flashes of dense primeval forests, of deep caves glittering with unknown minerals. And always that sense of ancient, patient waiting. I tried to go back to my normal life, or what passed for normal these days. I rented a small apartment in town, picked up some odd jobs here and there, but I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, what I'd felt. One evening, about a month after the incident, I found myself at the diner again. The waitress, I'd learned her name was Marie, slid into the booth across from me after her shift ended. "You look better," she said, studying my face. "Not so haunted." I managed a small smile. "I feel different. Not better exactly, just different." She nodded as if she understood perfectly. You've seen beyond the veil. It changes a person. I looked at her sharply. What do you know about it? Marie sighed, her eyes growing distant. My grandfather, he had an encounter back when he was young. Never talked about it much, but I remember how it changed him. He'd spend hours staring into the woods like he was waiting for something. Did he ever see it again? She shook her head. No, but he always said it was out there watching, waiting. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Waiting for what? Marie met my eyes, her gaze steady. I don't think even he knew, but he always said that creatures like that, they operate on a different time scale than us. What's a lifetime to us might be the blink of an eye to them. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of her words hanging between us. Finally I spoke. I can't stay here, not knowing it's out there. She nodded, unsurprised. Where will you go? I shrugged. I don't know. Somewhere different. Somewhere without mountains and deep forests. Marie reached across the table, squeezing my hand briefly. Just remember, Lowell, no matter where you go, you carry this experience with you. It's part of you now. I knew she was right. As much as I wanted to run, to forget, I knew that what had happened in those woods would stay with me forever. It had changed me in ways I was only beginning to understand. The next morning I packed up my meager belongings and checked out of the motel. Frank, the owner, shook my hand as I turned in my key. Take care of yourself out there, he said gruffly. And if you ever need a place to stay... I nodded, grateful for the offer. Thanks, Frank, for everything. As I drove out of town, I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror. The mountains loomed behind me, dark and imposing against the sky. For a moment I thought I saw movement among the trees at the edge of town, a large, dark shape that seemed to watch my departure. But then I blinked, and it was gone. Just the trick of the light, I told myself. Just my imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Whatever I'd encountered in those woods, whatever ancient, unknowable thing had touched my mind, it wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. As I drove away from Pine Haven, heading towards the open plains and big cities, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't an ending. It was just the beginning of something much larger, much older than I could possibly understand. And somewhere out there, in the deep, dark woods, something was waiting, watching, and remembering.